Welcome to Let's Talk Color.
I'm Amy Wolf, Principal Designer at Amy Wolf Color and Design.
And I'm Amy Crane, Founding Designer at Amy Crane Color. We're both professional color experts who specialize in architectural color. We met while training, and years later, the conversation is still going strong.
We both live our lives immersed in color and design. We often agree, but sometimes we don't, because color is personal. Color truths, however, are universal.
In each episode, we'll unravel the mystery of choosing color for your home or business, both inside and out.
Hey, Amy. Great to be back. Today we're going to talk about choosing color palettes for your interior. First, we're going to zoom way out and kind of look at some overall, philosophies and techniques for thinking about how to pick a palette for your whole house inside. And then we're going to zoom in on some of the details together. And usually we save our pet peeves for the very end of the podcast episode. But today we're kind of going to start off with some of those things that we know don't work, some of the common misconceptions. So what do you think, Amy? What's the one that stands out the most in your mind as what not to do?
Well, I have to say, out of all the crazy information I've heard out there, the one that makes me most nuts is to look in your closet or just think about the clothes colors you like to wear. That just doesn't relate to the colors that you want to surround yourself with in an interior environment. I mean, my colors in my closet run the gamut, tons of black and white and neutrals, and then tons of bright colors. And that's not what my home looks like. When you think about what you like to wear, you think about, your body shape and where you're going and your own style. And that just, to me, has nothing to do with the colors you want to surround yourself with in your home. It's just a different set of colors, and I think you need to think about it a different way. You have to attack it from the standpoint of what colors do I like to surround myself with? That's the way to go, not what you like to wear.
It's pretty funny. Well, it's funny to think of, how many people open their closet and it's a sea of black. Are we going to have those people paint all their walls black? Absolutely not. There's not a chance. So, yeah, I would agree with you on that. Back in the early days when I first got into the color game, as I was learning and, kind of learning to think about color, one of the shortcuts that I saw bandied about so often was this notion of open a fan deck and pick a whole bunch of colors from the same position on the fan deck. So, like you open your Sherwin-Williams fan deck and you pick a whole bunch of colors from like the second spot from the top, and that's a safe choice. And I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. We were taught in IACC that, we need to have some warm, some cool, some light, some dark, things like that. So if you just stick to that second spot on the fan deck, everything's going to be kind of the same value. And that is not a winning formula either. Also, those colors don't necessarily go together just because they have some similar shared geographical location on a fan deck, for crying out loud.
You can't just go, like you said, to spot number 2 or 3 around the fan deck and say, hey, problem solved. They're going to work together because they're not.
Those kind of shortcuts, I think, are always a problem. That's one of the things I've been saying probably for all my years in this business. There are no shortcuts. So
agreed. I mean, I also think sort of a similar concept also is to pick a lot of sameness, to go with any kind of monotone house where the walls are all the same color, maybe different values of them, or or go with all cools or go with all warms. And again, I think what's really important to create a successful palette in a home is to create an environment that mimics to some degree the natural world outside. And what we see outside are lights and darks, pure, high chroma, bright colors and muted ones, and colors from all different color families. So you really need to mix it up with thought, but not in a chaotic way, but mix it up so that your interior surroundings to some degree are like outside. Don't stick with all one thing, whether it's like, oh, I love blue, my house is all blue. This is an aqua blue, and this is a sky blue, and this is a navy. It's boring, and it's bland, it's boring, and it's just not interesting to spend a lot of your interior life in a home that's all same.
I think a lot of people also fall back on the paint it all neutral shortcut. And, I have been saying for years, again, years, that neutrals are the hardest. Combining neutrals is tricky. I did a house years ago, 9,000 square feet a house. That's a lot of rooms. And my client wanted everything neutral. And they didn't want to repeat any of my selections. Every room had to have its own neutral. And that was a challenging job. It really was. And, we pulled it off, and I snuck in a few colors here and there. But, that's something you best not try alone without the help of a professional. All neutrals is not a shortcut. So
yeah, I agree. And if you double that up even more and say not only are the walls neutral, all the walls neutral, but so is all of your furnishing and decor. It's just it is, like we said in our episode about neutrals, they're the hardest to combine because they're lacking so much colorfulness. And so you've got all these different sort of really muted grayed down colors or grays, and beiges, creams, all of those colors, and they're really hard to put together well. So variety, I think that is the key. That's the word, variety. But like everything else, with moderation, right?
Yeah, I really like that notion you have, Amy, of mimicking the natural world. Of looking to our natural surroundings and trying to replicate that degree of variety in our interiors. Feels very humane. I think that's a great philosophy. So now that we've talked about all the things that don't work, let's talk about how we actually do this. What happens when Amy Crane or Amy Wolf walk into your house and start to talk to you about picking colors? So where do you start, Amy?
Well, I actually start in writing, even if it is an on-site consultation, because I send a pretty in-depth questionnaire. And in it, I ask a lot of questions. And I would say, what do you like? Staying away from your pants and shirts colors. What colors and kinds of colors do you like to surround yourself with in an environment? Interior. And if you have a little bit of a hard time coming up with that list, maybe work backwards, because process of elimination is so effective sometimes. If you start with the colors you don't want, I don't want brown walls, I don't want orange walls, I don't want pink walls, whatever it is that's right for you, you can start to really narrow down the colors that you like. So think about what you like, and also think about not just the hue or the color, but think about the characteristics of the color. And there we go back to the famous three: hue, chroma, and value. How dark? How light? Do you have a lot of windows? Do you want, light colors on the walls? Do you want dark colors on the walls, or mid-tone? And do you like, very important question in terms of nature of colors, do you like clear colors or muted colors? So that's a really good place to start. What do you like? What do you not like? How about you?
I look a lot at the lighting. The natural and the artificial light, what direction the rooms face, and think a lot about the function of a space. I think that a den that you retreat to at the end of a long day, wants to have a cozy vibe. Your a kitchen that maybe gets a lot of sun or doesn't is a great place to energetically start your morning. So I'm looking at light and I'm looking at function. What is the inherent light situation? What is the function of that space? How do you want to feel in that space? And how can we use color, both hue and to some degree, lightness, darkness, the value of that color, to kind of carry the mood that is driven by the function of the room. I think that's really important. And a lot of that also goes back, I mean, I think everything that we talk about when we talk about color really ties back to one's personal relationship with color. And that goes back to your very first step, Amy, which is, determining what colors you like, what resonates with you. Never mind the closet or your clothing, but, what's your personal relationship to a color? One person's happy yellowy green is another person's yuck.
Hell.
So, right, exactly. Another person's hell. So, having that sorted. And I also want to kind of circle back to what you said, Amy, about figuring out what you don't like. I often tell clients that there's so much information, there's so much data in the things that we don't like. We are so clear about the things that we don't like and often much less clear about the things that we do like. So I totally agree with you that process of elimination is a huge amount of data in that. So that's good.
Yeah. Some other things to think about are how large or small the room is. Your tolerance or acceptance or delight in having a certain color or kind of color in a space is going to be or should be affected by the size of the room. If you want sort of a really dark color, the height of the ceilings, the amount of natural light, and the size of the room will affect how it feels to be in that black room or charcoal or navy room. It's going to really affect us differently. You might tolerate a dark color in a little tiny powder room, but not really feel great with 4 walls of it in your living room. That might feel like too much. So a lot of it is also about proportion. A room might be very small but have really high ceilings, and that might allow you to use a different kind of color than you would have if the ceilings were your average 8 foot or, God forbid, even shorter than that. Other things to think about are the other colors there, fixed colors like your floor or fixed finishes in a kitchen or a bathroom, countertops, tiles, cabinets, things, built-ins, things like that, and the colors in your furnishing. If you're starting from scratch and it's you just built the house, you just rented it, you just moved in, you might be starting from absolute zero, and you have nothing. But more likely than not, you're painting and you already have some rugs and furniture and things like that. And you really need to take those into account, not just because they have to blend nicely with the walls, but also they'll affect how the wall color looks based on what those colors are. Another really important thing is, as we've always said, context is so important, and we should not and don't, in fact, relate to and view colors in isolation. You may love this one color, but it's really about how that one color looks in that room, but also how it looks as you move through the house and in relationship to the colors next to it or nearby. And that's all about color combining. So another thing to think about in terms of what do I like is what kind of color combination do you like? Do you like subtle blends? Do you like to use variations of colors that are close to one another? Do you want a more energizing space? So you want contrast that really excites you? Did someone who is off their rocker tell you to have a monotone house? No, don't. Just say no. Or like just a few of us out there, are you into power clashing? So power clashing, I don't even know when I first heard that term. And I think that it was first coined in reference to fashion. But it certainly relates to interior design as well. And I would say power clashing is when you put together or combined items that common etiquette says don't go together. Okay, so, to mix patterns, and colors, therefore, a lot of different patterns and colors. There are some guidelines that are pretty tried and true and really usually are not ones that you'd want to break. So one is when you're mixing patterns, mix patterns of different scale or size, meaning they shouldn't all the patterns in the room shouldn't be big or medium or small. You have to mix it up, a big with a small, a medium with a big. And I think because different patterns inherently, because they're different, can cause a little bit of chaos. I think once you have different scaled patterns in that room, your brain creates a sort of hierarchy or order. It gives some kind of order to it and makes it acceptable to be in a room like that. And another important thing with mixing patterns and colors, certainly with mixing patterns, is that they share some colors that are the same, literally, so that it knits them together. But that's not really what power clashing is in my mind. So I'm talking about something wilder and more adventurous. For instance, you keep the scales different because that's really a must, but the colors in the patterns are completely different, and there's no stylistic relationship between them. They're just different. And there are some designers that do this really masterfully. Heidi Collier in Seattle, I think, is just an absolute master of this. And she creates so much tension from mixing different colors and patterns, and it creates excitement. And it's like really, fodder for the mind, fodder for the senses. But we all have a different design voice and different tolerances and proclivities for mixing colors and patterns. And I think there's very few people who like to power clash. I do a little bit, but it takes really adventurous taste, and I would not foist that upon a client at all. You'd have to see that a person is into that kind of thing and go for it.
So, are you talking about? We were talking about sort of that room to room, movement, going from one space to another. When you're talking about power clashing, in terms of pattern mixing, I get it. That kind of happens in the space of one room. Do you think like power clashing from room to room with the paint colors makes sense?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that, I think for certain people done really carefully, it works. I can think of two examples. There's a house here, a country house up here in Columbia County where I am. It's owned by two designers who live in Seattle, and their entire house, little country house, and the whole house is white and green and walls. So many greens. In fact, really high chroma greens, and they used semi-gloss on the walls. Okay, no comment there, but the whole house is mixed greens, all different greens. And some people would say those greens clash. So that's an exciting house to some people and not to other people. I had these clients who moved from the country to a condo in DC, and the wife was an art teacher and a fine artist. And when they moved into this condo, I helped them with color remotely. And she said, look, yellow and blue, the house is going to be yellow and blue. And they were not really muted either. They were just on this side, the good side of being too bright. And she didn't even want neutrals in her hallways. It was color next to color. And she chose a warm yellow for a big dining room, living room. By warm, I mean an orangey yellow. And then adjoining it was a stairwell upstairs to an upstairs hallway, and that was a green yellow. And I said, "Are you sure?" And she's like, "Yeah, this is great."
Wow.
Someone would call those clashing yellows. So
yeah, interesting. I mean, I kind of feel like, I don't know, when I think about this, like I totally get what you're talking about, and I have seen when I've designed a room that I've been a little too tight with a palette and a little too careful. And my eye is so good at putting the colors together just right that it can be a little boring. And so I think the beauty of that power clashing is to throw in a zinger and something that kind of is shocking. and a little surprising, and is that makes for an interesting space. And at the same time, I feel like that's something I'm probably more comfortable doing with fabrics and rugs and art, and maybe having the foundation, which is the wall colors from room to room, being less clashy and a little more harmonious. But yeah.
I'm in agreement. In terms of personal taste. I like that better. But I'm just saying I've seen it done, and for some folks, that's where personal taste. It all comes down to personal taste, what you like.
Yeah. I mean, because I think if there's one 4-letter word that begins with an F that I hear more than any other in a consultation, that word would be flow. Mm-hmm. It's not what you thought I was going to say, is it? But anyway, I think that flow thing is important. And I think power clashing with a pillow for mere mortals, those of us who are not Heidi Callier, is probably a safer bet. And I want to circle back real quick, Amy, to that thing that you were talking about with size and scale of a room relative to color. Because I think a lot of people, how many times have you heard somebody say about an inherently dark, dreary room, I want to make it bright and cheerful, and you just can't do that with paint. People will say, can't we paint it a light color? Can't we paint it white? And the truth is, you can't really change the inherent quality of a space or a room with paint. And so I'm often inclined to just embrace what is so about a room and think in terms of that dynamic experience of walking from room to room and having a shift from lighter to darker, cooler to warmer, and all of that kind of thing, and having that shift, vary. So if, for instance, somebody has a really small, low ceiling, tight, cramped, inherently dark entry foyer, I can tell you right now, we're not going to put a light color in there trying to bring light and spaciousness to that room. I'm going to absolutely just load that space up with a dark color. And that is, kind of ties also into that notion of compression and release from Frank Lloyd Wright. If any of you have ever been to Falling Waters, which is, I guess, probably his most famous structure, it's a house out in Western Pennsylvania. The hallways in that house are tiny. The hallways in that house are really, really tiny. And the experience of that is you move through these tiny hallways and then you emerge into a larger room. And relatively speaking, that larger room feels like giant, like you just got released, And so I think you can kind of use paint in the same way as you're moving through smaller spaces and into bigger open spaces. Color can really help kind of manipulate that experience from space to space. So
yeah, what you're talking about definitely is flow. You're referring to how we progress through a space. As you walk from room to room, you want to feel a natural progression and a rhythm to the colors and the types of colors there, for sure.
Yeah, I think there's a subtle line we have to walk between flow, which in its worst incarnation can be boring, and a dynamic experience, which in its worst incarnation can be overstimulating.
Another important factor to think about that goes with flow is cohesion. So how do the colors work together? And I think that that's really helped by using recognizable color relationships when you choose your colors. So we've talked about color theory before. There are two really key color relationships that are really helpful in plotting out the colors of a home. One is using complementary colors, which are those across one another on the color wheel. And the other is analogous colors, colors that are next to one another. So blue with green would be analogous. A yellow green with green would be analogous. And complements are things like blue and orange. And you don't even have to know the color theory to walk into a space that employs them well, these relationships well, and not feel the effect of it. So I think cohesion is all about knitting the colors together and creating a real sense of wholeness and oneness in the house. Even with variety, there's still a knitting together of the colors in a palette, and that's really important. And the third one is balance.
Wait.
Yeah.
Before we move on,
Yeah.
I just want to talk about knitting because I think I use a term which is threading or cross-threading. So when you talk about cohesion and flow, one of the techniques I like to think about is how do we pull colors from an adjacent space into the space we're working in? So in other words, if you've got a living room and there's, let's say, green on the walls, then in the next room over, there's going to be a different color on the walls. It's going to be its own universe and it's going to have its own palette, maybe. But let's take a little bit of that green and cross-thread it over into the adjacent dining room. So I think that's another thing that really helps create flow. I read once about somebody who said they could pick up a pillow out of the living room and take it to any room in the house and that pillow would work. And I think that given that that house has enough variety to be interesting and stimulating, if that technique still works where that pillow still moves from room to room and looks okay, I think you've achieved flow. It's not easy to do, but that cross-pollination, that cross-threading of color, I think is something to think about and to plan for. That helps make it happen. So
that's a great idea. And I think actually if that works, that actually achieves cohesion, even more so. And lastly, balance. So balance is more about an even-handedness in the colors that are chosen. So if you have darks, don't have one, have a few. And the same with lights. If there's wallpaper, don't have it in one room. Have it in more than one room. You want to have even-handedness in the house. You want to have a balance, again, using a word in its own definition. You want to have a balance of colors, a balance of kinds of colors in terms of hue, value, and purity.
I've talked to clients also about this notion that even if so let's take, for example, a center hall colonial. You walk in, there's a center hall. You have rooms to either side, both at the front and the back of the house. So when you're standing in the front right corner of the house, you can't necessarily see the back left corner of the house. But I still think that on some deep level, psychologically, or, we've internalized what that kitchen color is in the back left side of the house. And so when we're standing in the front right in the living room, we still have a sense of that house in its wholeness and that whole color palette. And so when we think about that balance issue, I want that balance to be not just what we can see, but what we feel in a house in its entirety and what we know to be true, even if we're not looking directly at it. So I agree. And I sometimes use the analogy of like scales or weightedness or, a boat tipping. I will stand in the middle of a house with a client and say, we can't have that living room tip like that with the navy blue paint without giving it something somewhere else to even it out. So,
yeah. And so I think if you keep flow, cohesion, and balance in mind and try to employ some color relationships and take into account all the different factors that we talked about, size of room, how you want to feel, what you like, what kind of bulbs you have, what kind of natural light is there, on and on and on, you'll have done it. You'll have a gorgeous house. Easy peasy, right? Just like that.
Well, I would say not so easy peasy, but I guess my parting advice, if we are parting ways at this point, having left you with all these truth bombs, my parting advice would be to think about your house floor by floor as an entirety. You don't have to do the whole house, but think about the whole floor. So many times people paint one room and then they move to the next room. And as they work their way around, they literally paint themselves into a corner. So I think when you think about these three big factors, flow, cohesion, and balance, think about that whole level simultaneously and how you employ all those three very important variables and come up with a whole palette that works. You don't have to paint all at once, but at least to be giving everything, to have it kind of come together so that moving forward you'll be making the right decisions. So
yeah, and one other note to that, I do make a distinction between public rooms and private rooms. I give people a lot of leeway to do something different if they want in bedrooms and even bathrooms. If it's a room that doors are closed often, or they're private rooms like bedrooms and some bathrooms, then I think you could step away a little bit from the cohesion if you want to.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. Like to me, like upstairs is a whole different universe. You can do whatever you want, especially when you're painting kids' bedrooms, which may be the topic of another episode. So
yeah, go wild. Paint those purple walls and those stripes and those stars. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so I think that wraps it up for today. We hope you've learned a lot about choosing colors for your interior. And tune in next time for more insight about color for the built world.
And if you have any questions or any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, you can find us at letstalkpaintcolor.com. We'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts, your insights, and know a little more about what's on your mind in the world of color. All right, thanks for listening. See you next time.